So,
Now on the APEC VIP hotline, cutting-edge training for the serious athlete, apecgo.com. Joining us now from Rattle and Hum Sports, the Big 12 insider, Kevin Lonnquist. How you doing, Kevin?
good, Brian. Happy New Year to you.
Happy New Year to you too, sir. How were the holidays?
Very nice and very peaceful, too.
Good. Did you OD on football and food?
Yeah, and at least my reputation wasn't stained too bad on my picks. I think I'm 6-2 going into the Sooners game tonight against A&M. So hopefully keep our fingers crossed, but at least I crossed the threshold with a winning record. So
Hey, you did good, though. That's all right.
actually, the ones I missed on were the only games that I missed on was Texas and West Virginia, and I got everybody else right. But I'm sure as Texas fans are concerned, they're glad I was completely wrong on that game.
Hey,
so.
Listen, I was surprised by what happened with Texas, too. Let's start with that. Texas and Oregon State, how big a win was that for the Longhorns? I mean, I know they're not satisfied that they were in the Valero Alamo Bowl to begin with,
Sure.
but they come out of the game, beating a good Oregon State team.
Very solid Oregon State team that had good wins over Arizona and UCLA during the course of the year. I think that game kind of typified the Texas season between the first half and the second half. The first half, it was the lethargic, uninspired, very poorly executing Texas Longhorns, and then in the second half, we just saw complete role reversal in which they dominated up front. I mean, defensively, they were dominating up front in the first half, but they weren't really making a lot of life. They just weren't getting the kind of things that they needed to kind of shut down a Storm Woods. And, they did a great job of containing him in the second half. David Ash looked like a completely different quarterback. David Ash looked like the David Ash that we saw in October and early November when he was really making good decisions, the way that he played against Texas Tech. The first half that we saw of David Ash was the one that we saw who looked awful against TCU and looked even worse against Kansas. And I really thought that was, and I'm sure a lot of Texas fans who are watching the second half of that game unfold kept thinking to themselves, why didn't we see this between Labor Day and Thanksgiving? Great question. Only the Texas coaching staff can answer that, because you could just see it, Brian, in the way they played the second half, especially with Alex Okafor, who had the 4.5 sacks of their 10 in that game, that they played up to their talent. And that's the great mystery with the Texas team, is that we know they're going to get talent year in and year out. The problem is, why don't they ever play to their capability? And and as Mac has said, he's always thought that the 2013 season will be the team to really make the push for the national championship, because he was really excited about the 2011 signing class. And I guess we'll find out as far as the offseason is concerned.
It looked to me like on both sides of the ball, Texas was more aggressive. They played with more intensity than I've seen them play with in probably the whole year.
Well, and I think you're absolutely right on that. Because I think a lot of Texas fans and a lot of pundits kept thinking this is going to be a total flat spot because they are going to the Alamo Bowl. And I talked to a lot of good friends who were texting me the night before saying this is going to be an absolute disaster tomorrow in San Antonio. Flat out, that's what they said. They absolutely feared that. And the fact that they came out and played very inspired, I'm going to say more inspired toward the second half. The first half, I still thought they were pretty lethargic. But when they came out and played like they did in the second half, and I thought the way that they won the game, too, rallying with the great touchdown pass. I mean, that was such a great ball that David Ash threw to Marquise Goodwin, and just threw it up to a spot, and Goodwin ran under it. That was a great play on both sides, just trusting that he would be there. It was a great move that Goodwin made on it. And again, the way that the Texas defense closed out the game, and when the back-to-back sacks on Oregon State's final possession, where Vaz just really didn't have a chance, I think that really spoke to how well they wanted to win this game and take some good vibes into the off season.
How much of a difference did it make that Major Applewhite was calling the offensive plays?
I guess, I think a lot of people put too much stock into that stuff. You can be a great play caller, have the reputation of one, and still have a bad game, and people still think you're a great play caller. I think for Major, though, that he put David Ash in some pretty good positions to make some good decisions where they were rolling him out. But Yeah, and of course the offensive line, which has been Texas's problem over the last couple of years, held up a little bit. When David had time to throw the ball, even just standing in the pocket, he looked pretty good on a couple of balls. I mean, David's a pretty accurate passer anyway, especially when he gets time in the pocket. And he's tall enough so that he can see over the line of scrimmage. But still, the running game just did not really get going in that game. No one had more than 30 yards rushing in the game. So I think there's still some stuff that they've got to do with the running game to get that looking in better shape, because you just cannot have three talented running backs when Jonathan Gray, Malcolm Brown, and Joe Bergeron sit around and collect dust in the backfield.
Right. Okay. Let's move on to, I think, the team that gained the most in the bowl season and probably did more to help themselves as far as going into next year. Baylor had a huge win, just crushed a top 25 ranked UCLA team. Did you see that coming?
I thought Baylor would win, Brian, as we talked about a couple of weeks ago. I thought Baylor would win the game. To talk about Baylor winning the game because of their defense, no, I didn't see that. I mean, I know that Baylor's defense had been playing well in November, forcing turnovers, but this was a unit that got 6 sacks of Brett Hundley, UCLA's quarterback, and the way that they just came out inspired, ready to play, brought the pressure. The blitz packages were great. I thought that they did a great job on them, disguising those and delaying that, especially with corners and safeties coming in with the gaps that were opened up. And, Maude Dixon was big. Chris McAllister, who, I saw him in a spring football game a couple of years ago. And I told people, I said, he may not be huge as far as height-wise, but I said, there's something about his motor that I really like. And he played an outstanding football game. And, for all the criticism that we were levying toward Phil Bennett and the way his defense was acting like Swiss cheese throughout much of the year, it's a great statement and a lot of momentum that they can take into their spring football season. And I absolutely think that Baylor has a chance to be considered in the conversation for the Big 12 championship next year, because you've got to remember, too, Brian, there's a lot of young kids on that defensive unit that are either coming off red shirts or are going to be sophomores, and they got some pretty good defensive players over the last couple of years.
What did you make of TCU's loss in the bowl game? I'm trying to remember who they lost to.
Michigan State.
Thank you. I went blank. Michigan State. Michigan State was a better than a 6-6 team, but still, it was a 6-6 team.
It was the game I thought we would get. Very defensive oriented. Both teams were in the top 20 in total yards allowed. I think I had picked when I put the game summaries on there, I should say my predictions and the forecasts on the bowl season about a week or so before the Bulls got started. I think I had Michigan State winning something like 20-17 because the quarterbacking play was going to be an issue on both sides.
Right.
So Trevon Boykin was still going to have his redshirt freshman mistakes, and again, because he didn't have a full off season really working with the first team offense. And it really showed. I mean, obviously Michigan State got a huge gift when Sky Dawson muffed the punt at the 4-yard line and just basically set up the Spartan second touchdown. Because if that doesn't happen, I don't think Michigan State wins the game. But that's the game, and Michigan State took advantage of the break. I think as far as TCU is concerned, there's a lot of talk that Casey Paul, who's apparently in an outpatient rehab program right now, should be back on campus when their fall semester, or I should say their spring semester starts on the 14th. And so we'll see if, A, that does happen, and B, if it does happen, how that's going to be received in the locker room and how Gary Patterson is going to balance that. And which way is the locker room going to lean? Are there going to be more people behind Boykin saying he just needs an off season to really get to know the offense so he can trust his decisions and just become a better passer? Or is there going to be a divided locker room because there are enough players in the locker room that really want to have give Paul Hall another chance? I don't know the answer to that. I think that's going to be the major issue concerning the Horned Frog football program this off season.
Where do you come down on that?
I kind of thought that it probably would be best for TCU and Paul Hall to part ways, but I don't know the inside makings of the locker room and the dynamics that are going on in there. And if Patterson is doing it because he really wants to keep, there is the school of thought that if Gary Gary can have the idea of saying, well, if I leave him out there, he could just disintegrate and become more self-destructive than anything else, and I want to at least keep him in an environment where he's going to have a support network around him. If I throw him off campus and he wanted to transferring somewhere else, is he going to get the kind of support he needs? So I can understand the TCU point of view if that's the direction they're going. But at the same time, and it's a great human element, and you can't discount that. I still think, though, just from a standpoint, if they feel like that, I just kind of feel like they probably should have parted ways with Casey. But again, I'm not making that decision either. So I'm not making $3.5 million to make this decision either. So.
I totally understand. Okay. I just very briefly, you can touch on whatever else struck your fancy. I know that you had great emotional ties to that Texas Tech Minnesota game.
Yeah, I think what that game was well, number one, that was much closer than I thought. I thought Tech was going to win in a blowout, but you could see in the fourth quarter how that was setting up. You had the veteran quarterback in Seth Dagey versus the freshman quarterback from Minnesota and Philip Nelson. Now they were rotating another quarterback in there in Marquise Gray, but you could just see where that was coming. Where Minnesota got a couple turnovers in the fourth quarter, but they couldn't do anything with them, and it's a one-score game. And as good as Dagey is, you just cannot give a leader like that an opportunity. If Minnesota had found a way to, because I think their second interception, they got it around the Tech 45, and they couldn't do anything with it, and they had to punt. And that was when it was about 3.5 minutes to go, and Seth Dagey just let him right down the field. And you could just see it was a case where they kind of stood out like a sore thumb, where the veteran quarterback makes the decisions because he's been through the fire before, and the freshman quarterback for Minnesota, Philip Nelson, who hasn't really been in this kind of situation, just did not make the plays necessary to pull off the upset.
You surprised at all by the outcome of the Oregon-Kansas State game last night?
No, not at all. I kind of thought that, but what I am surprised at is the fact that how much Kansas State beat itself, especially in the kicking game, when they gave up obviously the opening kickoff for the touchdown. They had the mistake on the procedure penalty and wound up missing a field goal toward the end of the first half. And then the bizarre one-point safety when they blocked the extra point in the third quarter, in which they scrambled and took the ball in the end zone, and then wound up taking the one-point safety because they got tackled in the end zone. Those are just things that were uncharacteristic of the Wildcat season. I mean, Oregon State was heavily favored to win the game, and they did. And the Ducks obviously were able to work around the distractions with Chip Kelly and the NFL flirtations and things like that. But I still thought that it was going to mean a perfect game for Kansas State to win the game, and they just made too many mistakes. Think about this too, Ron. Kansas State this year was averaging a little over 3 penalties and 28 yards worth of penalties in a game, which is outstanding.
Yeah.
And last night they doubled it. They were 7 for 57, and with that margin of error that they've got, you just can't have that, especially against an Oregon team that'll put the pressure on you once it puts its hands on the football.
Okay, let's talk about the Cotton Bowl tonight. Texas A&M taking on Oklahoma. You can kind of throw out this SEC versus Big 12 stuff because it's kind of irrelevant here. More likely it's Big 12 versus old Big 12. So how do you think this is going to come out tonight, considering OU's dominance over A&M over the last 13, 14 years?
Yeah, and I know everyone has a lot of feelings about the Aggies and the momentum, and especially with the Heisman Trophy winner with Johnny Manziel, and deservedly so, but I still think OU is going to win the game tonight. And I say that because OU, the type of offense that A&M runs, OU has seen several times this year. They saw it with Baylor, they saw it with Oklahoma State, just to name a couple of teams that they saw it with Texas Tech. So they understand how these quarterbacks will make it work. Nick Florence isn't Johnny Manziel in terms of running, but Nick Florence did rush for over 400 yards this year. Seth Dagey could scramble when he needed to, and Oklahoma State's quarterbacks could run when they needed them to. So OU is kind of programmed to handle a running type of quarterback. Do they put a spy on Johnny Manziel? I don't know. I mean, it's just something that I think they're going to be used to, and I don't think it's going to bother them too much if they can just keep Johnny Manziel in the pocket and make him beat you with his arm, rather than allowing him to extend plays and then taking off and running. Then I think OU wins the game. I mean, Landry Jones, for all of his criticism that he's received from OU fans, And he does have a BCS win. He has won and shared a Big 12 championship. So I think that he'll make enough plays tonight to win the game despite the suspensions, with McFarland being out and Saunders is coming back, but with McFarland being out with his DUI arrest.
Okay, and then I'm going to ask you, and it has nothing to do with the Big 12, but while I got you on the phone, I'll just go ahead and ask you, who do you think wins the national championship on Monday night, Notre Dame or Alabama?
That's a great question. I've thought about this game for so much. I think the Irish are going to win.
Really?
Yes.
Okay. Why?
And I don't know why. That's a great question. That's even a better question.
Hey, that's why I'm here, you know.
Exactly. I think the Irish are going to win because I think that Golson has really made some strides at quarterback for them. He's making enough plays down the field. I know he's going to feel a lot of heat from that Alabama defensive front. But the problem is that Alabama secondary this year has given up its share of big plays. It's not a vintage Alabama secondary.
Mm-hmm.
You know, obviously, but your boy Mettenberger from LSU is making plays down the field against them. And by the way, congratulations on those 8 3-and-outs in the Chick-fil-A Bowl, too.
Yeah, I was very impressed with that offensive performance, believe me.
I had to get that in there, by the way.
Thank you so much.
But anyway, but if Mettenberg's making plays down the field, Johnny Manziel is making plays down the field, a quarterback that can make some plays down the field, I think he's going to make enough to get that secondary a little bit rattled. And Notre Dame's defense is really good, and I think that they're going to bring enough pressure on A.J. McCarron to make him uncomfortable. And I expect it to be like a 20-16 game, and I see Notre Dame winning the game.
Well, fair enough then. That's why they play it, and they certainly both deserve to be there. So it's going to be really interesting. I have a hard time picking against the Nick Saban team in a national championship game, if you know what I mean.
I do. I mean, I hear what you're saying on that, but there's just something. I think it's just more of a case with me that I'm just kind of going with my gut on this time.
And that's worked out so far so good. A whole lot better than my gut, that's for sure. And my team.
Yes, but no problem with that last 2-minute offense that Clemson was running there.
Yeah, really. Listen, just don't even get me started. All I know is that we're the most unhappy 10-3 fan base in the country right now. So.
Yeah, well, I mean, and the other thing I was going to say, too, about the SEC, because everyone is judged by their bowl records. Every conference is judged by that.
Yeah.
But I mean, if you look at the SEC this year, I think I've said this to you on a show or two before, Brian, that it was a pretty top-heavy conference. And really, when you get into the meat and potatoes of the conference, they look no different than anybody else. Have they come back to the pack? I think they have a little bit. And I know that everyone's just kind of presuming that Alabama is going to be there, but this isn't as good as the Alabama team was last year, in my opinion.
Well, the thing about the team, the conference, top heavy is 6 teams in the top 10, but every one of those teams has some kind of a flaw. There's no great team in that bunch, and the thing about it, just like what I was trying to tell people the other day, Florida losing to Louisville, that doesn't make the SEC a bad conference, because by that thinking, that would make the Big East a good conference, and we all know that's not true. Louisville was just a really, really good team, and they played great and kicked Florida's rear end the other night.
Exactly. I mean, and then you look at the South Carolina-Michigan game, which I would deem probably the best bowl game of the year.
Pretty good.
Of the season. I mean, I know the Big Ten went 2-5 in its bowl games, but really the Big Ten didn't play terrible in a lot of its bowl games. I mean, I thought the Big Ten made, well, with the exception of Purdue against Oklahoma State, but really, I mean, you can see where, and this is kind of an indication this year where you can see, the 85 scholarships for each Division I program, where the talent is so spread out that it's going to, that margin of winning and losing a game is a couple of plays here and there, and that's really what it comes down to.
It really is. There's not that much difference between 1 and 20 when you get right down to it.
No, not at all. And I think that you talked about Florida. That was a case where the Gators. I don't know if I buy the theory that they were not interested in playing the game because they were feeling sorry for themselves that they weren't.
No, I don't buy that.
You do or you don't?
No, I don't buy that.
I don't either. I think they just weren't ready, and I just, their offense has had all sorts of problems this year.
Yeah, and you know, the thing is, the one thing that could not happen for Florida is they could not get in a hole early because their offense is not built to come from behind. And when they got down 14-0, you know, right off the bat in the first quarter, they were playing uphill the rest of the night. And it was, and they're undisciplined. I was really disappointed in the, you know, a lot of people that were talking about, I can't believe a Will Muschamp team would be that undisciplined because, you know, Will Muschamp's a Nick Saban guy. And I'm going, hey, listen, there's a difference between intensity and discipline. And there's a lot of intensity in that Florida team, but there's not a lot of discipline, and they showed it a lot the other night.
I'll take it a step further. There's a difference between intensity and stupidity. And
well, that's also true.
And so, you know, and that's one thing. I mean, well, look what happens on the opening kickoff when they go for the second half kickoff at the onside, and then they get flagged for two unsportsmanlike contacts, and they get a player kicked out immediately. I mean, he was a backup running back, but nonetheless,
it was dumb football all night long, and Louisville played. I mean, looking back on it now, Louisville looks like a really good Big 12 team. Why don't you get them in the conference, you know?
Let's don't go there.
I know. We'll leave it alone. Hey, Kevin, it's great talking to you. Look forward to talking to you again down the line, maybe next week, and we can recap and hope everything goes well for you this weekend, all right?
All right, thanks. You have a great weekend too, Bryan. Thanks.
Kevin Lonnquist, the Big 12 insider from Rattle and Hum Sports on Bryan Houston Sports Radio Live on 99.3 Talk FM.